What's up? What's up? This is the ChoppedByT podcast where we get real, raw, authentic conversations. I'm your host, T. And to the right of me, we have Lincoln. How you feeling?
Good, man. I'm feeling good. How about you?
I'm doing okay. I'm glad to have you back on the show.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Last time, when we did the last podcast, immediately after we got done, we started to speak, just talk. And you told me something. I won't lie, this set with me because I'm so afraid. Listen, when you told me you said you had demonic visions, right?
Yeah.
And when you said that sat with me for a while, and I was afraid. I won't lie, but not of you or anything. But it's just the idea that you can have a good person like yourself, right? And something like that can start to happen to them. It makes me think like, when could that happen to me? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but we'll get to that later in the show. But I want to start from the beginning.
Yeah.
You said it, all of this stuff started to happen maybe a year and a half ago when you started having issues at the job, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, there's a lot to it in and out. I'll try and give you the best overall version I can. So, I had taken a new job. It was the best paying job I ever had. My wife and I were very excited. And we were in a good place in life. Had just had a child. So everything was going right. We're like, man, this is the next step. God's blessing us. And had a run-in with a coworker that wasn't in and of itself super traumatic. It wasn't physical. It wasn't anything. And there were just some verbal things a couple times that were conversations that were had that were very hurtful and to me and dug up some really deep-rooted insecurities and deep-rooted traumas that I had never really worked through. Mm-hmm. And from that put me in a really bad place. I tried to stay at that job for a while because it was a really good paying job. It was super flexible. And overall the people were good to me. But from that, I spiraled into, and this was kind of winter of 23, I spiraled into really deep depression. Mm-hmm. From that came some very severe anxiety, which ended up leading to very strong suicidal ideations, to the point of had to give my guns to a friend. Had to take him back home at one point up in Indiana. I'd even picked out a place behind our house. We live on like 16 acres. I'd even picked out a spot on the hill where I was like, this is where I can do it. Kind of looks pretty. Or I'd be driving down the road. I'd be like, because the feeling, and there's so much to unpack, but the feeling when you're going through something like that, depression, anxiety, it's hard to explain unless you go through it, but it's this feeling of inescapable doom. Something awful is going to happen. I can't get out of it. I can't get away from it. And it's constant. I would wake up. And again, it's interesting to say like all this flowed from some stuff at a job. Mm-hmm. And because I was the guy that if you used to tell me this story before I went through all this, I would be like, man, just get over it.
Right.
Kind of like what the three of us talked about last time with Dejan, like as a man, is I'll just get over it, tough it out. And that's what I tried at first. But until you go through it, it's hard to understand what depression and all that does to you. But I had irrational fears and thoughts, and people were going to come for me, just all this stuff that lasted for months and months and culminated in the suicidal ideations. And it was a really trying time. We had essentially a newborn child. Mm-hmm. We had recently moved. I ended up having to leave that job. I started to see a therapist, and my wife was like, just keep seeing the therapist and see if you can tough it out at the job. And I would call her just about every day during work, just bawling my eyes out because it just, again, nothing. I was safe, but I just had these feelings inside of me. These deep-rooted insecurities that were brought up through some of these interactions, to where I could not function. Mm-hmm. I could not be. Just my mind was enveloped in these irrational fears, and I would be bawling my eyes out. And it's funny because if you ask my wife prior to all this happening, we've been together total now like 14 years. She could count on one hand how many times she'd ever seen me cry before any of this. Yeah. Now I go through this and I'm just bawling my eyes out all the time, and just this fear gripping me. And so eventually I decided to leave that job. And I was like, well, as a man, you got to provide for your family. So I went back to the job I had prior, which was a super great place. My supervisor was awesome. I was like, I just need to get out of this environment and go over here and it'll be great. Mm. And she even warned me, my wife warned me, she'd offered, hey, we're blessed to have some money in savings. How about you just take some time off of work, see a therapist, focus on things, get things right. And I was like, no, I'm a man. I got to have a job. So I went back, and lo and behold, she was right. Because like we talked about last time, she is a therapist, so she kind of knows what she's talking about. And the same issues followed me, irrational fears. Now at a job where I was like the best in my department, there was one year that based off performance, I got a higher raise than even the bosses.
Yeah.
Like I was good. So I go back to that place thinking, oh, I'll be great. And all the same issues follow me, irrational fears. Now my supervisor even said, like, you're a totally different person. Like you have changed. And she was saying in a loving way, but all that to say, I learned like this mental health crisis, man, is going to take more than just a couple weeks of therapy and taking some time off. And it's funny because that was around April of last year. And my wife and I said, all right, we're going to take like a month, 2 months tops off of work, then we'll get back at it. All be great. And then like 6 months later, it's still, there was still a lot of road to traverse.
Yeah.
And so from that, so I ended up start taking a couple months off, focusing on some things. And it just progressively got worse and worse with the irrational fears. And we didn't know it at the time. This was later on last year. Ended up being diagnosed with moderate to severe OCD, specifically moral scrupulosity. If you don't know, there are like 30 subsets of OCD. So
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. Yeah. You think, if you ever saw that show Monk,
I love that show.
That's
my show.
That's what I thought of too, man. Everybody goes to that because you just think it's washing the hands and germs and stuff, but it's not. There are 30 subsets, and you can have multiple of them. And so moral scrupulosity is basically where it's such a general umbrella that it makes it tougher to work through. But moral scrupulosity basically means you are irrationally afraid of doing something wrong, and that could be a myriad of things: causing harm to somebody, screwing something up at work, causing somebody's death, whatever.
Yeah.
And so many things have fallen under that. So we didn't know it at the time, but that is essentially what was going on with these irrational fears and being afraid of all these random things. Yeah. I was just like, what the crap is going on with this anxiety? Come to find out. And so I've been going to an OCD clinic for a while, which has been helpful. But again, going through last year, things just keep getting worse. Fall into that depression, suicide ideations. What happened was, and you mentioned the demonic stuff, and I'll kind of get to where that comes in. Things culminated really June of last year. We were going to church. I was sitting in church that Sunday, and I could not sit still. My body could not be still in a bad way. I was like, I cannot be here.
Yeah.
So I get up. My wife has our child in the nursery, so she doesn't know what's going on. I end up going to a supply closet close to the gym at church, and I'm just in there, and I'm losing it because if anybody's gone through depression, anybody watching this, and you know how it feels, it is like a prison in your mind, your body. You may physically be safe around you, but you are convinced internally that you are not safe. Right. Something around the corner is going to get you. And when you go through that long enough, that wears you so far down to a point where that's where the suicide comes in. Yeah. It's hopelessness. I don't see any light at the end of this tunnel, so I might as well get out of the tunnel.
Yeah.
And I was at that point. I just couldn't take these feelings anymore. It was 24/7. And so I go in the supply closet. I'm pouring my heart out to God. I mean, all through this, God, take it away. I mean, the whole time, and it never magically went away. So I'm like, man, I don't know what to do. And I remember there was a set of kitchen knives in that closet. And I didn't draw blood, but this is where I knew that I was in a really bad way. I took one of the knives and started putting it across my wrist. And it's interesting because I was talking to a therapist about that later. As far as suicide goes, if you're cutting yourself, it's actually not so concerning with correlation to suicide. It's more of a cry for help, causing pain. When you're actually making plans and like a firearm, a gun, something like that, that's more final and concerning. But so what I learned was in that moment, I was just trying to find a way to escape. Let me feel something other than what I'm currently feeling.
Right.
And so I was like, man, I just did that with this knife. I put it back and I go out and I text my wife, just told her I'm really struggling. I didn't tell her that part. I told her I'm really struggling. She's like, you need to get back in the auditorium and you need to, like, you just need to be around people. So this is where the spiritual stuff really started to happen. So I'm in the hallway, auditorium's this way, gym's this way. And I would take a couple steps to the auditorium, then I would just feel my body pull me back towards the closet. Go back, isolate yourself, all those thoughts. And I literally paced back and forth for a couple minutes until I forced myself to go to the auditorium. And what was really cool, I was standing in the back and I told myself, I don't care what the preacher's talking about. I don't care what the lesson is. I have got to go forward. And I've got to ask for prayers. And so I went forward and, that passage Joshua says to his brothers, Joseph with when they come to Egypt, and he forgives them. He says, "What you all meant for evil, the Lord meant for good." That was the start of that theme throughout all this time, that what the enemy meant for evil of isolating myself and harming myself, God was going to use that for good, that I was able to get to a place where I knew I needed to be around other people in that auditorium. I went forward, and from that, I got invited to a men's group at church. And a lot of benefits have come from that. Again, there's so much to this story. I know we have a limited time, but a lot of good things have come from that, of community of men. Before this season of my life, I really didn't have a lot of male friends.
Yeah, and that's vital.
All my life, I struggled with that. I could never really, because to be very honest with you, I'm a kind of a different guy. I was the guy, I was really good at sports, but I also played clarinet and piano and was in theater. I made good grades, but I also enjoyed working out.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit more in touch with my emotions than maybe your average guy. Also probably because I'm married to a therapist and I just learned how to do that. Yeah. But like all my life, I've been kind of not your normal, like just dude. And so it was hard for me to connect with other guys. And so when God brought this group of men into my life last year, that changed everything. Yeah. And that was the start of God using this hard season to bless me in other ways. A lesson I learned from that of going forward, I started to reflect. I realized, man, God wants to help us, but sometimes we have to take that step too.
For sure.
Because I had prayed up to that point so many times already, God, take this away from me. Why? I know you can do it. Why won't you just remove these feelings, these thoughts? And he never did. But when I went forward, and I don't want to say God's just waiting for you. God only helps those who help themselves. I don't believe in that. But what I believe is that there are times that God wants to see us step with him in that action. And so he saw me go forward, take that step, and he said, okay, I'm going to bless that action. Here's this group. Again, nothing magically disappeared. I continued to struggle and started doing some side work for my father-in-law because I'd just been sitting around the house, and that's never good mentally. So that was good to be active. But through this season, man, it was really trying for my wife and I. It was hard on her because she has a lot of tools, which, by the way, I know I'm talking a lot. If you have any questions, I don't want to just keep rambling. But she is a therapist. She has a lot of tools, and it's tough. It was a tough time for her because she's like, man, I have things that I know can help him. But where's that line between wife, spouse, and therapist?
Right.
It's a very fine, blurry line. Right. And so she would help me at times and use some of those tools that she had as a therapist and work with me. But up until the demonic stuff happened, I never really considered this a spiritual problem. I just thought, man, I just had some trauma in my past brought up and I'm having to work through it. What the heck's going on? And so on and so forth. Correlating to all this, I briefly mentioned last time we talked about pornography, and that I'd been addicted through all this to pornography for like 17 years. I believe that it is awful. I know there's some varying opinions. Oh, well, if it doesn't hurt other people if you do it by yourself. I completely disagree. And I don't care if that ruffles feathers. I think porn is from the enemy. I think it is from the pit of hell, and it has ruined more lives and relationships than just about anything. Yeah. So up until this point, I was still looking at pornography as an escape, and that's why a lot of people use it to escape uncomfortable feelings. It's a drug. Yeah, just the same, man. And I had decided around this time through some irrational fears, but I stopped looking at pornography. By the grace of the Lord, I was able to stop. So that happened around the same time I was doing some of these things with my wife, therapy-wise. She was just trying to help me out with some stuff. And I remember that I had this vision where we were kind of working through some stuff, and I just had this vision, wasn't purposely trying to think about it, but what I thought was a good figure sitting next to me on a couch, like to help me out. Again, this is all visualized in my mind. All of a sudden turned into like this demonic judge dragging me off to condemnation. And I started to panic. I had this overwhelming panic. And with the kind of therapy my wife does, there's something called a calm, safe place. It's kind of like this. It can be anywhere that you just feel relaxed, that you go to mentally when you just need to chill for a second. So I had mine. It's out in the woods. It was pine trees and all this whatnot. And so she's like, all right, let's calm down, go to that real quick. And so I go, and then all of a sudden I see it in my mind. It's just set on fire. And so I know that this demonic presence is like burning down this place that mentally I should be able to go to.
Right.
So I'm like, what the crap? A later time,
you're awake. This is all happening.
Yeah. It's not a dream. I'm awake. It's like just kind of coming. Some of the things that she's able to do with therapy just kind of help you process through some things. And she was giving me some of those tools, helping me do some things at home. And so, I mean, and that's the thing that freaked me out is because I'm a very rational person. And so I'm not logically creating these scenarios. They're just coming to me like, oh my gosh. At a later time, I'm sitting there and we're actually working through the pornography issue. We're talking about it, just kind of working through it as husband and wife. And all of a sudden I hear a voice internally. It's not my own. You know, if you have your own internal dialogue, it's your own voice.
Right.
It's not my voice. It's not any voice I recognize. And all it says is, we're not going to let go of you that easy.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my gosh. And I started to see in my mind like these three kind of shadowy figures. And I instantly knew like this is demonic. Like this whole thing is now spiritual. And I came to realize like this was around the time I stopped looking at porn. Because I had been, up until this point in my life, I don't want to say the whole point of my life, but for a large part of our marriage of now almost 9 years, I had become a very apathetic husband. I wasn't really leading our family. I love my wife. She is very strong-natured. I say strong, what do I say? Stubborn, and she corrects me and says strong-natured.
Yeah.
But she's phenomenal, and sometimes it's easy to step aside and let somebody like that lead because they want to. They like to, whatnot. And I'd become apathetic, addicted to pornography, making bad financial decisions. I called it embezzling money from our savings account. We were blessed to have savings, and I would make purchases for things I wanted, stupid stuff, whatever, and I would transfer the money from savings to cover it, and I wouldn't tell her. And so I said I was embezzling money from our savings account. So I was doing things throughout our relationship that was it was not good. It was not a godly man. I was not leading our family. Now we had a child. And so I believe for years, God had tried to gently kind of prod me and say like, Lincoln, you need to correct these things. Right. Lincoln, because Terry and I would have conversations throughout the years and she'd bring it up as a concerned wife. And I just never paid much mind. Right. And my life was good, man. I had a good job. I was in good health, working out, was buying the things I wanted to buy. Like, why would I change? Right. So I believe the guy was just trying to gently prod me. And eventually he was like, look, man, you're going to get to a place where if you don't change, it's going to lead to a life of death. Maybe not physically, but the Bible talks about like sin leads to death. It's not sometimes physical, it's spiritual. It's who we are as people, just brings death. And I think I was on that path. Yeah. And so God said, I don't think God orchestrated the stuff at the job, I don't think he made it happen. I don't think he, let it happen like, I hate Lincoln. I think life happens. Yeah. Things happen. I think God said, okay, here's a really tough situation, Lincoln, that has woken you up. It's like smacked me with a 2x4. And you can either use it to make you better or you can use it to fall back into all these other things. Yeah. And the choice is yours. I love you and I'm here for you. And I'm going to give you the tools to make these changes, but it's up to you to use it. I think that's, again, I don't know the mind of God. It's kind of like, it could be like Job where all his buddies tried to figure out what was going on and nobody knew. And nope. The thing about Job is he never found out. Even after God blessed him with a double portion, he never knew what happened. And so I understand I may never know why all this happened, but I accept it happened and I can use it for good. So all that to say, I was very apathetic. This event woke me up and I was starting to make positive changes in my life. I remember I was walking outside one day last year and I was just like, God, what do you want from me? How do I work through this? And he said, you need to confess everything to your wife, just everything. Yeah. So I remember I sat down with her and she knew about the pornography and stuff, but I told her about the money, just like all this stuff. And that was God saying like, okay, continue to step forward in faith. And I know these things are hard, but you have to make a choice to change through these things. So I'm making changes. I'm improving myself. I stop looking at porn and all of a sudden this demonic presence comes in because, well, we don't want Lincoln to wake up. Lincoln's been apathetic. He's been doing the things we want him to do to keep him quiet and keep him still as a man of God. Let's just put him away. Now he's waking up. We don't want that. So we're going to come against him. Yeah. And the OCD, skyrocketed at this point. I think the demonic oppression came through. Pornography was a way to quiet a lot of those impulses and compulsions and irrational thoughts. It allowed me to glaze over that for years. So the OCD became almost unbearable. All that kicked up. The demonic oppression came even stronger. But a blessing that came through this time was I had a good friend from high school that we had kind of stayed in touch off and on throughout the years, just, when you follow up with somebody. But after that event where I heard that voice say, we're not going to let you go that easy, I was like, I don't know how to handle this stuff. I grew up Church of Christ where you don't even talk about the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Like, you don't learn about none of that. So I'm like, how the heck do I address this?
Right. And I know Church of Christ.
Man, you don't talk about that stuff. And so I remembered, hey, she's Pentecostal. I'll go to her.
Right.
So I called her and told her what was going on. And her dad at one time was like the second highest leadership in one of the largest Pentecostal denominations in the world. So she's like, would you mind if I have my dad pray for you, let him know what's going on? So a couple of days later, we get on the phone. And from that came a relationship that has changed my life, my wife's life, my daughter's life forever. They essentially, my friend and her parents essentially took me under their wing spiritually. They ended up sending us to a deliverance ministry that was for a week. It cost like $3,000. They paid every bit of it.
Wow.
100%. And they said, any follow-up stuff you need, we'll cover it. They have prayed over us countless times. Again, Church of Christ, I'd never been anointed with oil. They anointed me with oil and prayed over me. And I started to learn so much about spiritual battles and spiritual warfare, and it woke me up to that. And so it was neat, again, to see when you step out in faith. I made a phone call, reached out to somebody, and how God blessed that and said, okay, I will help you. I'll give you the tools. The way it makes sense to me, because you're a parent as well, is in the context of parenting a child. Our daughter, Scarlett, if she's about to do something that she can't get out of, it's really going to hurt her, I'm going to save her. But a lot of times if it's stuff where she needs to kind of learn the hard way, like I'm going to let that happen because I want you to learn. I love you enough to allow you to fall and hurt yourself because I want you to learn to not do the thing that caused it, but then also how to get yourself back up. Right. If I just save you every time, you're never going to learn those lessons. So to me, it made sense of God was letting me fall and hurt my knee throughout this process. But when I was ready to get picked back up, when I learned my lesson, and he was like, okay, I'll help pick you back up now. Let's keep going. And I'd fall and hurt my knee or whatever, and he'd pick me back up. And so I believe those blessings were that along the way of God. Like God was always there, even though it doesn't always feel like it. And that's something I learned throughout this is your feelings are very deceptive. And I don't know, obviously people that would watch this, everybody has a different spiritual walk and maybe none at all. But I would say that even though it may not feel like God is with you, he's always there.
Always.
100%. You can see that throughout the Bible. I mean, we read the Old Testament and it seems like God is silent for hundreds of years. And then all of a sudden, the Israelites are in slavery and he frees them. But God is still always there watching. His providence is there. And that's hard because sometimes we go through hard times and we say, well, God, where are you? But, why won't you save me and deliver me from this? Where's the blessing? Well, what I learned is sometimes the blessing is that hard thing. Yeah. Because the man I am now is astronomically better than the man I was. And that is the blessing of God. The blessing wasn't that he just magically saved me from all this stuff. Yeah. The blessing was he allowed me to go through it with his provision around it, but he allowed me to go through it so I could be a better man. That's a blessing to me. And I'm glad he didn't save me from it. Sorry, I keep going.
And that's funny that you say that because that was a thing of mine, right? I questioned God so much of why is my mother going through what she went through. She grew up poor. She lived her life, working hard, check to check, things like that. She had kids. She took care of people. She was a good person. She was in the church. She never allowed, the devil to come in, right? And why does she end with, having Alzheimer's, not really a support system around her? Why did she end in that way? And I would ask that question over and over and over again. But it's like, I've learned so much from watching her life, and I think that's the blessing. Like I get to reap the benefits of her and her hardship by learning from it. And I think she did as well in some weird way, Sure. So that's crazy that you said that. I want to get back to the relationship you were able to build and the tribe that you had. Was that through Church of Christ or was that through the Pentecostal church?
Through the church, the men's group.
Yeah, the men's group.
Yeah, through the Church of Christ, where we go. Yeah.
Are you once you went to Pentecostal, were you able to still establish that relationship with them?
Well, I didn't go to a Pentecostal church. They had just kind of ministered to
Gotcha,
me outside of it as friends. So we still go to Northside Church of Christ up in Nashville. But no, they were Jacelyn and her parents, Saul and Winnie, are Pentecostal affiliated, and they ministered to us kind of outside of that.
And that's something people are so hard on the church. That's something that they don't mention things like this, where they were able to get you in this situation, pay $3,000 for you to go away for a week. I think that's a blessing.
Oh my word, yeah.
Did it help? What was the experience there? Were you?
Man, it's funny because they told me ahead of time, just because they knew how I grew up. Just make sure you're open minded, because they knew all of it was going to be very counter to anything I had experienced. And so deliverance centered around, and it's been since October last year, so let me remember, generational curses, things in your past, whatnot.
Was it, I'm sorry to interrupt,
you're good,
but is it, when you say generational curses, is it, paint that picture for me when you say.
Yeah, and honestly, it was kind of confusing to me.
Yeah.
It was essentially throughout your family line, sins, things that have been done that gave a doorway to the enemy to come in, that have carried down. And that was a hard pill for me to swallow, because I'm like, what if somebody 3 generations back did something I had nothing to do with, and now it's come. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, what I've learned is when the enemy gets a legal right, and at least how I've learned that I mean, heaven, if you want to call it heaven, but essentially just the realm, the unseen realm, angels and demons and spirit realm. How that operates is there's essentially a legal system.
Yeah.
If you look at Job, Satan had to get permission from God to do things. It's not just a free will. Like, he had to get that permission and get that right. And so we give the enemy a legal right, so to speak, to oppress us through sin, through a lot of different open doorways. So yeah, that generational curse could be something 2 generations somebody in your family did, that the enemy got that doorway, and now they're coming against you for it. And
paying for the father's sin.
And that's in the Old Testament. God tells the Israelites through Moses, like, if you do these things, it will be paid into the, whatever generation it is. Like, it's unfair, but at the same time, take that as a responsibility of what I do now has ramifications for generations to come, literally. Sure. So let me live my life that doesn't give the enemy a doorway for my child or my grandchildren. It's a huge responsibility. But there was that. I forget the technical term, but basically ungodly beliefs, I think is what it was. So beliefs about yourself or about God. God hates me, God's out to get me, or I'm a terrible person, nobody likes me. Just very limiting beliefs. Actual demonic oppression. So talking through that and doorways that could have been open for demonic oppression. And so it was a week of a lot of prayer, a lot of allowing the Spirit to speak to you and give you, what I learned was that God speaks to me a lot through visuals. So my wife went through it as well, which was really cool. We were able to do it as a couple, which was really, really neat. God speaks to her more through single words that create kind of an overall theme. But that was life-changing for us, to just learn more about ourselves, our relationship with God, free ourselves of a lot of the past. Soul ties was another one. I know a big way that comes in is like past sexual relationships, where you give a piece of yourself away, but also soul ties come in through unforgiveness. If I wrong you and it really hurts you, and yet you never forgive me, a part of you is still tied to me into that event.
Wow,
but until you forgive me, you have not closed that door. So we worked through a lot of that. So it was huge.
Yeah, I never think of soul ties in that way either. I always thought sexually.
Just sexual, but yeah, there's a lot of different. You leave a piece of yourself with people in a lot of different ways.
How did you eventually close the doors to that demonic oppression?
Well, a lot of it is prayer, and that's what I learned. Saul, the father of my friend from high school, he taught me that it's really not that complicated. It's pleading the blood of Christ against these things. It's obviously repenting of that sin. It's not like, you can be like, oh, Lord, forgive me, and then you keep doing it.
Yeah.
You repent, you turn away from, you plead the blood of Christ against it, and you continue to pray over it. And not so much like continue to ask forgiveness, because the Lord's forgiven you when you seek that, but to continue to pray against that oppression, pray against the demonic. And that's something that that didn't make a lot of sense to me, because in my mind, I'm like, well, if I pray against it and shut that door, isn't it shut? Well, I learned that it's continuing to pray over that thing is a continual show of faith against that thing. The way makes sense to me if you talk about like opening doorways, like these doors here, the door leading into the room. I may have shut the door against the enemy, but he still wants to get in. So he's going to keep banging on that door, pushing on that door. So if I just step away, he's eventually going to break it back down if he wants to. You know, my will as a human is pretty low. Paul writes about that in Romans. You know, I do what I don't want to do, and my flesh is weak. So you have to continue to push against that door to hold the enemy back. And, you know, God will give you the power and the ability to continue to do that, but it's an ongoing thing. But it's not some ritual, some sacrifice like in the Old Testament. It's not, because I imagine like, man, if this oppression is so big, the solution must be big. Well, it's not really Christ. What's interesting is Christ, with his blood on the cross, paid the price for us to be able to, but you still have to go claim it. It's kind of, again, my scenarios, the things that make sense to me in my head are always random, but it's like if you won an award on the radio, you won a cash prize, you won it, you still got to go claim it at the radio station. So Christ paid the price, but you still got to accept that forgiveness, and you still have to seek repentance and turn away from those things.
You ever thought about being a preacher or something like that?
Man, it's funny. I was told that in college. I came back home and taught a class, and somebody told me if I don't go into ministry, I missed my calling. And I was like, man, no way. That's not it at all.
Really?
After this, man, I've thought, dude, I love it. I love talking about this stuff. That's why I was so excited to come on this podcast, man, because I'm like, it's something I prayed about so much throughout this year is using this to help other people, to bless people, especially men with mental health. But like, I love talking about it because when God has helped you through something so profound, it's like you can't help but talk about it. You know, it's what Jesus was saying about the woman that cleans his feet, and he's questioned about it. You know, she's cleaning your feet, and he says, like, you know, whoever is forgiven of a little, you know, is going to react in a smaller way, but the person that's forgiven of a lot is going to react in a very strong way. Like, God has saved me from a very hard time and brought us through it. Of course, I'm going to be excited. So, I don't know, man. Like, if anybody ever asks me to preach, I'll do it, but it's not anything I'm doing right now.
Yeah, no, I think you would be great at it. One, you great speaker, of course, but you know the word, and you paint it in a way that's digestible.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. So you're going through this. I want to go back to the suicide. So I know you said you had picked out the spot and everything like that. What are you dealing with in this moment? Is it well, how's your wife and family and everybody around dealing with this in the moment? I imagine it must have been rough for them and you, right?
Yeah, man, it was tough. So that Sunday where I went forward, because I eventually told my wife when we got home what I'd done in that supply closet. I mean, keep in mind, all this is in the context that we have like a 1-year-old.
Yeah.
So it's not like we can just sit down, just us with no distractions.
Right.
To work through, and I have been so grateful for her throughout all this, because she as a wife has had to navigate this as a wife, as a mother of a newborn.
Right.
That, with a new child, they usually favor their mom. So she's the one having to do a lot of the things and to navigate all this. So that Sunday we got home, I told her, and I remember that she just broke down crying. I eventually take our daughter into the room to get her ready for a nap. I come back out, and Tara Lee had gathered all the household cutlery, the knives and stuff, forks, anything sharp, all my knives, pocket knives and everything, and took it and hid it over at her parents' house. And I mean, it was extremely hard on her. My family, I had let them know what was going on when things really progressed. And my family loves me. My mom's going to watch this because I told her I was coming on. So, but I've had this conversation with them, so they know what I'm about to say. It's not a shock. I mean, growing up, I was very blessed, had a great life, but we talked about this last time. There's a lot of pressure as a kid growing up in a very public family. Yeah. So our relationship growing up was a bit contentious. When I went away to college, things got a lot better. But to be honest, I didn't talk to my parents all the time as an adult. We would talk maybe once every couple of weeks.
Yeah.
We weren't super close. I mean, always have loved each other. Weren't super close, but I started talking to them about what was going on, and the blessing was that we got very close. Yeah. Started talking a lot more. I came to a place where I was able to talk to my dad about some of the things growing up that had hurt me that he had done. I forgave him. We had a great conversation about it. Talked to my mom about, like, with pornography as a kid, I learned that they knew that I was looking at porn as a 15-year-old, and that they didn't do anything about it. Yeah. And I remember I would get in trouble if I didn't turn in an assignment. Man, the hammer would come down.
Right.
but they knew I was looking at porn and nothing really ever happened.
Yeah.
And I remember that really hurt, but I forgave them for that. And we talked about that. So this brought a lot of healing, but it also brought a lot of conversations. I have a couple of years older than me, sister. And, she found out what was going on. We talked and to this day, I talk to my mom just about every day now. We talked about her health issues that have brought that on. I talk to her every day now. Talk to my dad pretty often. He's a very busy man, but talk to him pretty often. Talk to my sister a lot more. Yeah. So this has done nothing but enhance our relationship. But they wanted to help out any way they can. My parents helped us out financially because I was out of work for a couple months. So they were willing to help us out financially and bless us there. So we live on 16 acres next to my in-laws. Which if you can live next to your in-laws with a newborn, do it. It's phenomenal.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But they stepped up and, if Terry Lee and I needed to go back to the house to kind of talk through something, I was really struggling that day. My mother-in-law would watch our daughter for us, drop of a hat.
Yeah.
Again, my father-in-law allowed me to start doing some side work. I had no experience in any of this stuff, and he's like, super chill, just do it when you want to, no big deal. So that was a blessing, allowed me to earn money as a man, feel like I had purpose.
Right. That's important.
And very important, and do it in a place and in a way that it wasn't pressure. It was very safe mentally. The people around me really stepped up, but it was extremely hard. And my wife went through a very hard time in a different way, but just as hard as I went through.
Yeah. No, that all of that, and I want to go to the OCD as well.
Yeah.
That I imagine that must be something that, in a way that I don't forget the name for, but I imagine that must be something that a lot of men have, because it seems like that's rooted in the pressures of trying to be a man and everything like that. So I imagine that's probably something that a lot of men, as you say, certain things like the fear. The irrational fears and stuff like that. It's like, wow, I kind of experienced that a little, will I mess this up and things like that. Do you think that was the situation at work was just a breaking point? And from there, do you think that was the case, that's just a breaking point? I know we talked about it a little, you mentioned like how it was kind of God's way of kind of ushering you into the person that you are now, but do you think the experience at work was just a breaking point? It was just a build up prior to that?
I think so, yeah. Because if you look at that isolated, it was an unpleasant experience with that individual on a couple times, but it wasn't like the end of the world.
Exactly. I'm sure you had been through worse.
Yeah. But I think you're right. I think it was that final piece, and it was a culmination of a lot of insecurities I had deep as well. Yeah. So it was kind of the final straw, and it encapsulated all the things I struggled with, not being able to connect with men very well, male authority figures, insecurities with my dad. Like, it was everything wrapped in one. Yeah. And so it was just a straw that broke the camel's back, I think, for sure. Yeah. It was. Yeah. But
and now the group that you're in, I want to explore that a little. Yeah. What does that do for you as far as
the men's group?
The men's group, yeah.
So unfortunately, we don't meet anymore. Everybody's very busy. But when we were meeting, it was the first time in my life I felt like I could 100% be me. Mm-hmm. And not worry about being judged, and have men that supported me and genuinely cared about me. Yeah. And I mean, I still have the relationships. I see a lot of them at church, obviously. And it is so cool to be able to go and chat with them and not feel like I have to pretend to be, cooler than I really am, or put on a show as a guy and flex and all this stuff. Like, I can be me, because my natural disposition, I'm very goofy and I love having fun and stuff. I can be who I am. Not worry about being judged, because they've seen me at my worst. I've called multiple of those guys when I was in a very dark pit with these thoughts that make no sense to them. Yeah. Like, this makes no sense, but Lincoln's really struggling with it, and they've sat there and talked to me and helped me and never judged me.
No judgment.
Like, that has changed my life 100%.
Yeah, that's what the military was for me. I had a job. We had, it was all men, because my job was what they call 13 Fox, which is more like a combat MOS. And so it was all men, and that's what that was for me. It's just an opportunity to be, who I really was. Yeah. And I think that's important. I think that's important for men to have a tribe of men to be around. Women are important in that as well, but I think that's important for men to have. And I'm glad that it's funny that you say you played clarinet. I played the trumpet. I played sports and everything too. Yeah, so I was kind of like, I teetered the line. I'm really big into cartoons and anime and stuff like that. Yeah, so I was kind of one of those guys as well.
Did you try and tamper that down or not let a lot of people know about that side of you?
Yeah, in the beginning. Yeah, for sure. Because, you just fear of judgment, and I think that's what the military was for me. It was a opportunity for me to be around people, like-minded people, but also people just very different from me and my upbringing. To see those people and just opportunity to talk. And that's all we need.
Yeah.
What do you hope to gain from these past experiences, or what do you hope to gain by telling your story now?
One, it's just always therapeutic to talk through it.
Right.
It's helpful, to continue to get it out. But more so just how many men are out there that have gone through something similar and have not ever talked about it. So a couple months ago, I made a Facebook post just kind of letting, in a very general sense, just about everything. And I had a friend that I worked with and went to college with reach out and said he went through a really bad slate of depression and never told anybody, not even his wife, and just gritted through it. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of men like that because the perception, like to not have a job, if you need to step away from work and focus on things, to not be working, or, to admit that you're bawling your eyes out all the time, like all this kind of stuff just has a stigma around it. So what I hope to gain is, man, for God to take this pain and give it a purpose.
Right.
That's something I thought a lot about, is like, I don't know how people can go through things like this, any kind of traumatic time, and not have a hope in Jesus, not have, not just salvation for our souls, but that, like, redemption of the pain we go through. Because there's going to be pain. I mean, Jesus tells us that you're going to have that, you're going to have trouble in this world, but take heart because I've overcome the world. Like, it's going to be here. Yeah. And yet God can redeem that and use that for good. And that's my hope, is how can I use this whole experience? Because it sucked. Like, if I had a choice, would you like to go back through it? Absolutely not. But I'm glad I did go through it because of who I am now. So let's have this help other people, bless other people. I told Terry Lee, I was like, man, if there's a way to like write a book anonymously, because it's not like I want to, make money off of it or anything. Like, how I'd do everything anonymously if I could and still get this story out there, because the point would just be, let other men know, like, it's okay to not be okay. Yeah. I've heard that a lot in songs and stuff lately, which is encouraging. I think Jelly Roll has a song that came out recently.
If it's the same one I'm thinking about, it's been a few years ago. It's the one that kind of sent them over the top.
Yeah, like he's put out some songs like that, and I think that's becoming more mainstream, which is encouraging that men are talking about that. And I think there's a balance. Like, there's a balance between complaining and just wallowing in self-pity versus, okay, I have a legitimate problem I need to work through, and I can't get through this on my own. Yeah. And you usually know internally, like, even throughout this past year, there were times I still would feel the difference. If it was just like, oh, I'm just in self-pity terribly, will you help me feel better? Like, and she'd call me out on it. Right. Versus I knew when this is legit and I need some help. Yeah. And I think we as men, we can be honest with ourselves when we're falling into one of those. And
that's amazing that you had that in your wife as well, to be able to say, like, hey, hey, you do need this. And the fact that she can identify that, because nobody really has that. And, she just has the tools. So that's a blessing within itself.
That's divine providence, man, that we ended up together. 100%.
For sure. And where are you now as far as, with everything mentally?
Yeah, I mean, leagues better than where I was. If you were to do an overall chart, it would definitely be, we're on the up and up, but there's still, those day-to-day issues. Like, something that ticked me off for a long time was to have to accept that I'll probably have this OCD forever. Yeah. And you actually, I wanted to touch on something you said earlier about, like, you're like, man, I've kind of had those irrational thoughts. Yeah. That's something I learned about OCD, is it's not this completely abstract thoughts that only OCD people have. The difference is you'll probably have a lot of the same thoughts I have. The difference is you can eventually move on from them. Yeah. I have a hard time. Gotcha. And it's not just like family stuff or providing as a man. I don't mind. It's kind of embarrassing, but it's helpful. So with moral scrupulosity, there's so much under that umbrella of making mistakes or whatever. It's like I'm going through this thing, and the thing about OCD is it'll jump around. It doesn't just stay on one compulsion. But right now I have this thing where, like, I get very afraid of breaking a toilet. Yeah. Like, you flush it, and then, you go into like a restroom at a store or something, you see this toilet just it keeps running, it's flooding. I just have this irrational fear that I'm going to cause that to happen. So I'll have this compulsion, no matter where I am, to where I have to stand there and watch it until it fills back up with water and it stops.
Yeah, and everything's good.
Because it's like, if I walk away, I have unbelievable compulsion that, like, what if it breaks and they look at the security cameras and they knew it was me that broke, it's thoughts like that. They're just like, what the heck are you talking about, man? Yeah. But people may have a random thought like that. Oh, I'd hate to break that toilet, but most people can just move on from it. But with OCD, you get stuck. The way it was described to me is like you fuse with that thought, and it's very hard to break that. So where I'm at now is I still have those thoughts. Driving is very hard. There's something called hit and run OCD, which just means, you drive over a pothole, and most people will be like, oh, was that an animal? No, it's just a pothole, and then you go on. But with OCD, you can't get it out of your mind of what if that was a person? What if I ran over somebody and killed somebody and blah, blah, blah. Like that still happens. I mean, heck, even driving here, that stuff happens. And I've accepted that that'll probably be with me the rest of my life. And not that I'm like Paul from the Bible, but it's almost like if that's my thorn in the flesh that keeps me close to God, if he's made strong in my weakness, if that keeps me humble and keeps me in prayer, then that's great. It's not pleasant, but I think it also goes to how do I define a good life? Do I define a good life as comfort? I mean, you're talking about your mom. Like, by all accounts of what she had gone through, she doesn't deserve what she has. Yeah. She deserves a good life. But how do we define a good life? Is it ease and comfort, or is it able to bless other people, blessing you as a man now with your own kid and lessons you learn from her? Because when we get to heaven, man, we'll have an eternity of good. Yeah. We'll have an eternity of perfect. But while we're here on earth, I think God cares more about our character than our comfort. And so it's okay, how can I develop Lincoln into the best person he can be here and use that to bless other people? And then, when you get to heaven, it's all that will be redeemed. All the pain we have will be taken care of and redeemed, and it will all make sense. So while we're on earth, though, there's going to be some pain that can be used for good. And where I'm now is just accepting that it is what it is. I haven't had suicidal thoughts in a while, which is a blessing. Right. But every now and then I'll feel that depression want to creep back in. And I'm blessed now to have some tools to be able to fight back against that. I have hope. I feel hope because I know, okay, I've gone through it before and I've come out the other side. I can do that again. Demonic oppression really hasn't been there. I think we've shut those doors, which I have a couple more stories if you wanted to get into those. But that's really been tampered down, which is a blessing. So just accepting it is what it is. I can use it for good, keep me close to God, and I can be okay with that.
Yeah. Do you have is it a history of this type of thing in your family with other people?
No, and that's something we looked at in the deliverance ministry was a history like that. And no, I'm trying to think through because I had to ask my mom and dad specifically about our family history, and no, nothing like this has ever happened. Or
maybe it did, but it's just
nobody talked about it.
You know what I mean? Or back in the
could be that too.
Especially our fathers and stuff like this. It's like, it's just work and that's it.
Sure.
Yeah. But we can get into the more stories about the demonic oppression. That had, first of all, I'm 2 weeks. Listen, 2 weeks. I'll be thinking about this. Okay, I'll be looking over my shoulder. I'll be like, what? It's just, it scares me so much. Even though every time, in the name of Jesus, I come to you. Because I'm here alone by myself a lot, and I work from home and everything. So it's like, whenever I get those thoughts, I lean more on Jesus and everything. But it's a real fear of mine to allow the devil in.
Sure.
So, but we can go into that.
Yeah. So I had that one where I said, we're not going to let go of you that easy, in that voice. I had another one later, this was months later, where it's kind of the twilight of the morning. You're kind of waking up. You're not fully awake, not fully asleep. And I knew that there was demonic oppression. I'd been praying against it, working against it for a couple months with those friends from high school and her parents. And I remember kind of waking up, and all of a sudden I have this vision, and I know I'm not asleep. So I know it was more of a vision of I'm just looking in a mirror. It's just my reflection. Everything's normal. And all of a sudden my reflection gets yanked away. And in the distance, in its place, is a black silhouette figure surrounded by fire. And it's a very unpleasant feeling. The feeling of that is not good. Yeah. And so I go and I tell Saul, the father, I tell him about it. And he says, well, now we know the demon that's been assigned to torment you. Yeah. I was like, first off, they can be assigned to you?
Right.
He was like, yeah, that's the thing. They kind of have their hierarchy. There's jobs. They're assigned to you. And I was like, well, that sucks.
Yeah.
because I never thought assignment. But he's like, but that's good because now we know how to come against it. Now we know the thing to pray against. And, I tried to analyze like, okay, the vision of like my reflection being yanked away. And he's just like, man, you don't need to dive into all that of like, why did this happen this way in this vision? It's just, now we know what it is and we know how to fight it. So that really spurred me on to even fight back and more praying, studying the word of God, living a righteous life. We're not saved by our works, but our works are an evidence of our faith.
Right.
And so, man, I want to live out my faith. And then another one that happened, that was actually on the positive side, it was pretty cool, was this was an actual dream, middle of the night. And I ended up fighting the devil, but it was in a positive way. So at first there was a big fire and he was in the fire and he looked like your stereotypical devil with, big red horns and all that. But he like jumps and flies out of the fire. And by the time he lands in front of me, he's like very, like a beautiful, attractive man, like just looks very good. Because the Bible talks about it, that he's like an angel of light. He deceives us in that way. He comes in the form of an angel of light. He presents himself beautiful. And Lucifer was the most beautiful angel in all of creation, And so he comes and that's how he looks in front of me. And we have this physical fight. We're going back and forth, all this stuff. And at one point he tells me, like to the effect of, like I'm frustrated with you because you've put me on the defense. So like the things I've been doing, the ways I've been living my life and coming against him has put him on the defense. His plan to oppress me, he's had to go on the defense with it and so that was really encouraging as well. And all throughout sprinkled, there would be just some voices. Anytime I was in a really bad depression, the voices to harm myself were never my own. That's something I told Tara Lee that would always freak me out. I never heard them audibly like you and I talk. It was just always internal, but it was never my voice and it was never like me purposely trying to think that thing. But it was always a voice just saying things to me of harming myself, killing myself, of ways to do it, of visuals of doing it. And like you said, it was just always praying in the name of Jesus.
Yeah.
That's something also I learned is the power that we have in the blood of Jesus. I mean, if you're not saved, if you're not redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, then you don't have that power. And that's a hard reality. Not everybody is a children of God. We're all created in the image of God, but the children of God are those that believe in Jesus, are saved by his blood and, confess him as Lord and Savior. Those are the people that are the children of God. And the power that we have in that is we have dominion over these things.
Yeah.
And yet we don't claim it a lot because there's fear and doubt, but we have that ability. That's what God tells Cain in the beginning of the Bible when Cain's upset that God didn't, give him the same favor he gave Abel. He tells Cain, like, sin is crouching at your door and wants to devour you. You have to defeat it. You have to tame it, essentially. Like that sin and the enemy essentially presents itself as something that we have. God wouldn't have told Cain that if Cain didn't have the ability to overcome it.
To fight it, yeah.
But he had to remind him. So we can overcome these things, man. When they come up in our lives, we have that power. But a lot of us don't use it. One, because we don't know. But then two, we aren't as strong in our faith and have that knowledge.
Yeah. So. Were you not terrified during these moments?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, because I would have been.
Oh my word. Yes. It definitely, the earlier ones where I was like being drug away and my calm, safe place was on fire. I remember my body, because I was sitting on the couch with my wife and we're processing through this. I just remember my body and I broke down. It was almost like, it honestly was a sensation of me physically being drug away. I just remember I couldn't breathe. I was having a panic attack. Everything was closing in. I mean, it was just this fear. And it was almost as if it was happening around me in reality, but it was all just in my head in that moment. But yeah, it was terrifying, man, because early on it was so unknown.
Right.
I didn't know what the heck was going on.
Right.
As I learned more, it wasn't as scary. But yeah, definitely there's a lot of fear in that for sure.
Yeah. You mentioned having the tools to fight the depression and everything. What are some of those tools?
Well, definitely community. People you cannot isolate at all, even if it's just checking in with somebody. But having people that you can talk to, and I would say multiple people. Yeah. Get multiple perspectives, and also I would say people that aren't going to try and fix it for you.
Right.
Because when you try,
that's important.
Yeah, when you try and bring something to somebody like that, I mean, my wife was actually on another podcast recently and had a really good line that you cannot fix an emotional problem with logic. But a lot of people want to try and do it. They love you. They mean well. Yeah. And so it's like, man, my friend, my brother, whoever is hurting, let me help him. but your logical answer isn't going to fix this emotional problem.
Yeah.
Sometimes the best thing is just to listen and say, man, I love you. I'm sorry, man. I'm here for you. I had one of the guys and his wife came over to our house, physically came over and prayed with us, and just having them there in person. That was helpful. So I would say community in trusted people that aren't going to just try and fix you.
Right.
I would also say, I mean, we're talking about the whole time, a spiritual walk, like a faith in God. Cause that's, to me, that's the only way you can have hope.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that, not just redemption for your soul, but redemption of the pain. If you don't have that, I don't know what you have to look forward to.
Yeah. No, I'm with you.
It's like all this pain is for what, man? I'm going through all this. How's this going to be any good? I'll just turn back to drugs or alcohol or sleeping around. You have to have a hope in something stable. So those would be the two biggest ones. If you're married and your spouse, like you all being unified, Terry Lee told me early on, she was very blunt. She said, if I weren't a therapist, speaking as her, and if I didn't know what I knew and how to, she said, this is the kind of stuff that people would come to me about on the verge of divorce.
Yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, it's providence that she did what she did, had the knowledge, all that kind of stuff. But like having a spouse that is willing to stand by that vow for better or worse, sickness or health, sickness, mental, as well. But having people that'll walk with you through the pain, and that, no, it's not just going to be an easy fix. Last summer we thought, I'll take off for a month or two, and then, 6 months later, but understand like this is going to be a journey and it's okay. Another tool, actually, a blessing of this is I've gotten connected with a lady at church that's going through depression now herself. We were talking the other day, and she told me it's easier to talk to me, or it's helpful to talk to me because I know what it's like. And she was just kind of downplaying and validating herself. Oh, well, I know people have it worse than me. I shouldn't be down about this stuff. And I told her, I said, you cannot do that to yourself. Sure. There's no hierarchy of who deserves to have depression. Yeah. Factually, yes, there are people in this world that have it worse than you right now, 100%. However, you are in the place you're in, and that's okay. You need to say, I am where I am. Doesn't mean I'm a bad person. Doesn't mean I just need to get over it. I accept it, and allow yourself to feel that. Not just men, just us as people. We just try, and especially in the church, because it's like, well, if I just had more faith, none of this would happen. If I just loved God more. Well, no, sometimes life happens. You're in the place you're in, and that's okay. And so you have to allow yourself to accept that and feel the feelings. Don't try and push them down. As all the things you're doing for your family, taking care of your mom, those times where probably that feelings of depression creep in, or I'm not good enough. Like, not that you sit in it, but if you just try and push it, I'm not going to think about that. I'm not going to address that. It's just going to keep coming back stronger and stronger. But when you say, man, this really sucks. This has been a hard day. This has been a hard week. Like, these things have been tough. Like, allow yourself to feel it. Yeah. And it'll be like a wave. It'll come over you and it'll dissipate and go away. Say, okay, all right, let me get back to it, man. But acknowledge and allow yourself to experience that, and then work through it and move on with your life. Those have been helpful for me.
Yeah. Lincoln, listen, seriously, I think that if not, ministry, at least a speaker or something, or a podcast or whatever, however you can get your message out.
Yeah, thanks, man.
I think it's important for you to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I got a lot of compliments from the last show. Of that, just men, specifically men DMing me saying like, man, you got to make sure you stay in touch with those two guys, you and Dejan, just
thank you.
Stay in touch with them, keep having them on the show. And, anytime you want to come back and talk or anything I can do,
Yeah, I appreciate you, man.
I'll definitely do it. Well, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, for sure.
You have a great story, one that's probably going to, make me, I'm got to do some praying tonight for sure. just because I don't know. Maybe it's the movies. You know how Hollywood kind of like.
And something I learned is I would 100% cut out the horror movies.
Yeah.
100%. Anything to do with horror, anything to do with darkness, anything like that, 100% I would cut that out. Yeah. Because that's an easy gateway for sure, man.
Yeah. The pornography, I had to, I really had to have a talk with myself even after we had to talk off camera about that. Last time it was like, you got to cut it out completely. Yeah. But listen, thank you for coming on. Anytime you want to come back, my door is always open to you.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, this is the ChoppedByT podcast where we give real, raw, authentic conversations. Until next time.